Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to day 3 of Professional Development Days. I hope you are having fun with all the advancement, getting to know everybody, networking, taking some time to cherish these presentations. Before we move on to the presentation tonight, there are some legalese. So, this event will be recorded. So, anytime you're speaking or you turn on your camera, it might be used for promotional purposes. Please keep your microphone on mute, and we will be taking questions towards the end of the session. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll do a Q&A after the speech is done. Tonight we have an interesting session, and Darrel would be talking about mastering uncertainty, a crash course in risk management. Darrel Spayth is a highly rated instructor, experienced technologist, project consultant, and investor. Driven by a long commitment to purposeful learning and a deep desire to make a positive impact, Darrel is passionate about teaching essential thinking, doing, and investing skills. His mission is to help people achieve their envisioned future by guiding them to achieve and amplify their best results. With over 25 years of experience running a successful technical project consulting company and over 30 years as an investor, Darrel brings a wealth of practical knowledge and expertise to his teaching. It's great to have you, Darrel, tonight, and thank you for joining us. Please welcome Darrel Spayth.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go through these slides at a pace that'll hopefully keep you from going to sleep. But I hope there's content in here that you have not seen before, that it opens up your perspective on how to look at uncertainty and risk management and how to be more successful in your endeavors, whether they be work-related endeavors or personal endeavors. Those are always fabulous as well. Starting out, I'm going to introduce you to the slide here really quickly. In the upper right-hand corner, I have sensible project management, expect results. I'm gradually migrating to a website that's called sensibleprojectmanagement.com. And again, you can see the URL right here. It is a www website, so you would need to enter that or click on the link. In addition, I have a YouTube site called Sensible Project Management, and it's just starting to get populated. I'm kind of moving a little bit towards semi-retirement, and it's given me a little bit more time to give back through education, which I'm very excited and interested to do. My company is Spayth Management Corporation. I'll tell you a little bit about it very quickly as we go. But our topic tonight is really how to master uncertainty. And I wanted this to be as much of a mini crash course as possible. So we're not going to deep dive into everything. It's really meant to kind of give you a bigger picture. And like I said, introduce you to some new concepts where you can go research those a little bit further if you wish. Depicted on the screen here, on one side, you see maybe the typical project manager without any risk management skills, always running from fire to fire, crisis to crisis. Something's always blowing up. It's a very, very difficult environment. And to the right of that, we've got an environment that is just wonderful. Everything goes well. You know, it's never quite like that. So we're really someplace in the middle here. And the better you are at anticipating and risk management and running the processes related to running a project, the better you are at organizing the work of the project, applying the right methods, the more likely you are to be over into that zone where things just kind of flow along. And I've had customers, and again, I've run a project consulting company for 27 years. And so I've worked with lots of different clients. And I've had clients tell me after the project, they're like, well, you know, that turned out to be a whole lot easier project than we thought. I don't know if it was worth, paying you all that money. But, they don't realize that it wasn't an accident. And so you get all kinds of surprising things. I had one client say to me one time that it was the best executed project they'd ever seen, except for all that time we wasted up front planning. And again, it's kind of counterintuitive, but while that person was smart enough to know better, I think it was a little bit of tongue in cheek, a little bit of truth in there as well, that maybe they thought that a little less planning would have gotten an equally good result. I don't think so. In that particular environment, we're moving a corporate data center, and it was moving from one side of the building to the other. The data center serviced global manufacturing, could only be down for a maximum of 10 hours, and they were using no swing gear. So we were literally taking the gear, powering it down, unbolting it, rolling it down the hallway into the new data center, mounting it, starting it back up, all of that stuff. So many opportunities for failure. And if we missed our window, that 10-hour window, it would start costing the company $1 million a day because of their manufacturing facilities would quit, basically be down. So a lot of pressure, and the space was so constrained that we had more project team members than we had room to put them in the room. And so we literally had to know in 15-minute increments where everybody was and where the equipment was. And so that was what all that rehearsal exercise was all about. We executed the whole project in 6 hours, and we only had one system failure that we were able to recover within a couple hours. So within 8 hours, the data center was completely up and running. Really proud of that accomplishment. They ended up loving my project manager so much that they hired him away from me with my blessing. And he's still working there, and it's been like 12 years now. So that's a good story. All right, moving along here. As we go along, if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat. There's somebody who's going to kind of be monitoring in the background for those types of questions. I'm not that person. I'm not really good at looking at chat while I'm trying to talk because I'm busy talking. So moving on to the next slide here. At the start of your endeavor, whatever that endeavor is, there's things we know or what we think we know, and then there's a whole lot of things we don't know. And I love that saying from Mark Twain where he says, it's not what you don't know that creates the greatest risk. It's what you know for certain that just ain't so. And so very thought-provoking kind of idea. But this typical iceberg, what you can see and what you can't see. Up here, we've got known events, what you know of what's knowable risk. And again, the reason you know about it, even though you really haven't executed the project, is because somebody else did another project like that. So you have this analogous capability to say, well, it's kind of like that one. So you have some sense of what those risks are. You've also probably run other projects in the environment, and so you get a sense for what doesn't go well. Or it could be systemic general project risks that apply to every single project. And there's always a discussion about whether you should track those or not. One of those is, what if you don't have the right resource at the right time with the right training to execute the work that needs to be performed in that window of time? Well, that could apply to every single project you do. So there are ways of taking a look at that. The next category, as you look down below the water, this big area is all the unknowns, the unknown risks. Now, those fall into knowable risks, but unknown to you. You know, somebody knows them, they're knowable, it's just you don't know them. And then there's unknowable risks. These are things that are unknowable. You can't know about them. And we're going to be exploring a bunch of those as we run through this discussion today. On the screen, it's always fun to start out with a little bit of humor. Have you experienced this risk? I need a cost estimate on your project. The PM goes, I have no idea. I haven't even gathered the user requirements yet. The sponsor says, don't worry, I won't hold you to the estimate. The PM's a little smarter than that, knows better, says, yes, you will. You'll put it in the plan. Forget we had this conversation and fire me when we go over budget. Of course, the sponsor comes back and says, hey, give me a number now or I'll fire you right this moment. So the PM goes, oh, okay, it will cost $10 million. And the sponsor goes, well, that's too high. And the PM says, if you already know the cost, why are you asking me? And the sponsor says, so you'll feel like you had input. And then finally the PM acknowledges, wow, is input supposed to feel this bad? I've been into similar situations, and I'll share some of those stories as we go down the road here. A little bit about me. I'm not going to read this entire slide, but I want to give you a little bit of a background on why maybe you should listen to me. And the things that are really pertinent are down here at the bottom. These red area, I'm certified as a project portfolio manager professional, a project management professional, a scrum master. And folks often ask me, well, what's the difference between a PMP and a PFMP? And normally I explain it this way. The project management professional job is to efficiently and effectively climb the ladder. And the portfolio management professional's job is to make sure that ladder is leaning against the right building. Doesn't matter how good you execute if you're going in the wrong direction. That's how those two kind of interrelate at a really high level. I've run a technical project consulting business for 27 years, loved it. It's been a really great experience. So I hire project managers, train project managers. We embed in client environments and run projects for them. And many times I go in as a portfolio or program manager, and I have the client's project managers reporting to me. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about were going to be things that I've learned over time that I think are valuable nuggets that can be useful to you. The next slide here talks more about personal Darrel to give you a little bit of perspective. You know, the picture up at the top left shows me as a little kid growing up in Southeast Alaska. My dad was a commercial fisherman, king salmon for 47 years out of Alaska. I joined the US Navy before I turned 18. I love boats, and so I've got a fishing boat here and my sailboat's in the background, and this is my father monitoring one of my boats. And then along the bottom, I'm teaching class. The way that I've always chosen to give back, which is very important to me, is to help people or lift people to the next level. And one of the things I'll talk about in a little while is my limited warranty. Hopefully that might be of interest to you. But at the end of the day, I am driven. I have a lifelong commitment to purposeful learning, truth seeking. I'm constantly studying, moving forward, trying to learn new stuff. And my goal is to make a positive impact, doing what is right and honorable to help other people. And I view my mission as helping individuals and organizations achieve their desired future. On my day job, I do that by delivering worry-free projects. And then outside of that daytime commitment, I love to teach. And I teach through community college, Everett Community College. I've taught through Bellevue Community College, University of Washington, etc. And the areas that I really think make a difference in people's lives is these three areas: thinking skills, doing skills, and investing skills. And this forms a trifecta of employing thinking to navigate life opportunities. You have to know where you're going or where you want to go. And then using doing skills, which is really project management, to ensure that you have a successful journey. And finally, investing skills to grow your wealth. Because if you do the first two things right, you're going to start to accumulate capital. And wouldn't it be great if your money worked for you? So I teach all of those things at college. So those classes are offered at Everett Community College, but I also do some online stuff. And I'm starting to branch into YouTube a little bit more. And then finally, at the bottom, something that I think is extremely useful is I came across this idea, the learn, do, teach construct years ago. And it has been immensely helpful in helping me internalize and learn stuff faster. So it's learn it, do it, teach it, because when you have to teach it, it reinforces that learning. I strongly encourage you to follow that. I encourage all the people I mentor to follow that, and most of them get good traction out of that. So give it some thought. Today's discussion is going to be around just a couple things. First off, to have a good project, you have to know where you're at and get off to a clean start. So I'm going to introduce you to the logical framework if you're not familiar with it. If you are, it's going to be a quick review. And then we're going to move right into talking about uncertainty. Risk is really the uncertainty, variation of possible outcomes, events, and all those types of things. So a fun area to kind of focus on. Then we'll move from there right into a review of PMI's process, and I'll go through it fairly quickly so I don't bog you down. Now, if you stay to the very end, we've got a special deal for you, a bonus offer. And I will connect you up to some templates if you're interested. These are the templates that I've used to start projects at client sites for 27 years. And so they've been proven, they've been there, done that, got the job done. And then I also want to talk about the limited lifetime warranty that I make available to any student that I teach, anybody that hears me public speak, which basically is, if I can help you, I will, for free. And it's a pay it forward model. I'll go over that in a little bit more. Moving on down to common PM issues. One issue is that first one in line there, which is, hey, you don't understand the logical backbone of your project. There's an implicit backbone, but it's not explicit. And if you make it explicit, then everybody can see it. The next one is you don't know which project framework or method to use to organize the work. What should I do, right? The next one is you don't understand the nature of the work to be done. And lastly, you don't know what to do with risk. Everybody says you should do risk planning, so you do some risk planning, you accumulate some risk, but what do you do with those risks? Because it needs to manifest into your plans. These are some lessons learned from me over the decades, isms, mantras, and slogans. And the very first one up here, Number one is always adhere to the PMI code: responsibility, respect, fairness, honesty. If you're not familiar with it, I guess it was about 6 months ago for PMI, I did a presentation. It's available on the local chapter website. It's available on the YouTube channel at the very beginning, in the upper right-hand corner, the first slide. You can pick it up there as well. I strongly encourage you to use that as a tool. It's been a very effective tool for me to make sure that we're moving forward in an ethical way. Love the topic, love what the tool provides you. Number two is my mantra, and I ask my project managers to memorize this and to repeat it. If it is to be, it is up to me. It simply says that, hey, if I don't do it, it's probably not going to happen. And as a project manager, you're there to lead. So you do need to lead. If you don't do it, nobody will do it. So again, a strong believer in accountability. The next step is one hand to shake, one throat to choke, but no place to hide. Now, I don't choke people, but this is a saying, kind of a little mantra that reminds my project managers that you can't hold a committee responsible. You can't hold a department responsible, but you can hold a person accountable. And if that person is representing the department, I don't really care if there's 100 people behind. I want to know the person who gets the handshake or gets the throat choke, even though I don't choke them. It just helps you remind you about the accountability stream here. The next one right here, number 4, is your project sponsor should be the biggest dog in the fight. And that's a reminder of, do we have sponsorship for the project at the right level? Because if you don't, you're going to have problems. Most of those problems are going to be resource-related problems where resources are not going to be available to you. So what that means in a nutshell is that within the domain that you're going to execute, your sponsor needs to have authority across all of the resources necessary in that domain. As an example, if you're running a department level project, then the director of that department is an appropriate level for sponsorship. If it's interdepartmental or it's across the enterprise, then you better go up the food chain higher. Now, a lot of times I go to client sites and some more junior person, maybe a director or a VP or whatever, wants to be the sponsor, which is wonderful, but they may not be at the right level. So you have to then go and glue together a couple different co-sponsors so that collectively they control the domain in which you're going to execute. Becomes very, very important when you get resource constraints on projects and you need to free up a resource or you need to get permission for forgiveness. You want the right people to be able to do that. The next level down here is number 5. Each project should have only one purpose. Think about that for a minute. The purpose of the project, there should be only one. An example, I met with a client one time and they wanted to put in a human resource management system. They go, we would like to hire your company to select and implement. As soon as they said and, I knew I had 2 collections of work. I had 2 separate work streams. Now, I could put them in a program and treat them as 2 separate projects, or I could create one project and create different phases. It doesn't matter exactly how you group it, as long as you recognize you have 2 separate work streams there that typically involve different types of resources, different types of work, that type of stuff, different types of materials. Just always be aware, one purpose per project is the easy way to remember it. Number 6 here. And by the way, I'm going through these things because if you stay on top of this stuff, it's going to reduce the overall risk of your project from the get-go. And it's so much better to just go in and plan well and minimize risk from the beginning. And I have this motto, no surprises. And the only way I could not surprise my client is if my project team doesn't surprise me. So, I encourage them to always tell me early so that there's still time for me to do something about it. In fact, that's what the word timely means in project management. If you want to time, one of the examples I give, if I were going, I leave in the morning for work and when my neighbor leaves, looks on over and goes, wow, it kind of looks like there's smoke coming out of Darrel's house. Of course, he doesn't know any better. So he goes to work, he comes back later and my house is burnt to the ground. So he calls me and said, Darrel, hey, I got some bad news. Your house has burnt to the ground. Now, that's not very timely. There's nothing I could do except go have a beer, cry, call the insurance company. So it would have been very timely if he had said, on the way out that, I don't know. I didn't examine it in detail. It might be smoke. It might not be smoke. I could have at least gone and assessed the situation and maybe saved my house. So that is timely in projects and anytime you want to be able to do something with the information. Number 7 here, does the remaining work fit into the remaining time for the remaining cost and still achieve the purpose of the project? Remember, we're only going to have one purpose. Does it still achieve that purpose? And this is something, a mantra that I ask my PMs to ask themselves every week, typically around the status report. When you're checking the status of your project and you're thinking through where we at, how do I feel about this? Say to yourself, does the remaining work fit into the remaining time for the remaining cost and still achieve the purpose of the project? If the answer is no, it's time to pause and go figure out why. Number 8, document forgiveness when change decisions are made. Invariably, I go into client environments and they actually have a change management process. Now, you probably know that in PMI world, change management is used once we have baselined the project. Once we have an approved project management plan, the project is considered to be baselined. It means the scope is locked, the schedule is locked, the cost dollar budget is locked, and maybe the design is locked. It could be lots of different things that are baselined. But in essence, at that moment, you've got an approved plan. And if you're going to change that plan, people need to know about it. So there's a change management process to do that. I have clients that have this change management process. They go ahead and enter the change request in, they analyze the effects of it, they push it up the chain to the change review board or to the executive sponsor or whoever has the authority to accept or approve the change, and it gets approved. And they do nothing else other than decide that they're going to do the additional work or maybe remove the work. Now, what I'm getting to here is it actually changes your baseline at that moment. So go ahead and put that in there, the change to the baseline, and make sure your sponsor is aware of that. That's that forgiveness at that point in time. It's much easier than trying to convince the executive later that, oh yeah, you approved the change, right? So anyways, always have headlights out there so you can illuminate the landing zone. And while we're talking about the landing zone, when you have a schedule and it says September 18th, you're going to deliver the work of the project, and you have a budget that says you're going to deliver it for X number of dollars, never give a single number. Always give a range. The reason it's a range is because of uncertainty. We don't exactly know. We have a cone of uncertainty. We have a range of potential reliability of our estimates. On a 2-year project, it's not uncommon for me when I'm talking to the sponsor to say, okay, we've done the analysis and we're going to be able to deliver this project in the 3rd quarter of next year. And we're currently tracking for September 15th or 17th, but we anticipate that our date's going to move around within that quarter. So that's the landing zone. And as long as we're in that zone, we did great. Same thing with budget. It shouldn't be a single number. Moving on down here, the last one. Have the conviction to walk away from the project if needed. Now, if you're a captive resource, it might be a little more difficult. But one of the things that I negotiate into all of my contracts is I always tell my client is, hey, the minute you don't want me here, you just let me know and stop paying me at the moment. I'll charge you up to the time you say stop, and that's it. And for that privilege, I want to be able to give you 2 weeks notice that I'm terminating the contract. And the client always asks the same thing. Oh my God, we're paying you a ton of money. Why would you ever walk away? I said, well, you might ask me to leave because A, you've changed your plan and you're not going to execute the project, or you don't like me. And there is a small possibility I won't like you. And if that's the case, I want to be able to walk away too. And in 27 years of running it through my company, I've only done it once. And it was because of the sexual abuse. One of my employees were being sexually abused by the sponsor of the project. At first, I went to him to have that discussion, just thinking, okay, maybe there was a misunderstanding and, boundaries were crossed and things like that. And I knew as soon as he started talking, we were in trouble, because he goes, oh, hey, dude, it's just guys being guys. And, she's overly sensitive to being touched. I go, okay, this isn't going to work. I go, I'm giving you 2 weeks notice. Anyway, that was the only time in 27 years that I ever executed the walk away option. But another way that I've used it is, I'm a big believer, if it is to be, it is up to me. And it's my job as the leader of the team to represent the team and to provide air cover. And there were a couple very difficult projects we were working, and I was working with the client's project managers. And they weren't my employees, they were actually the client's project managers. And one of the PMs got off track and did a big boo-boo. And the sponsor called me in and says, hey, we're going to fire so-and-so. And I said, well, I don't feel really good about that. And I don't feel good about that because people do make mistakes, and I am very familiar with what happened, and it was an honest mistake. And we need to allow room for people to do that, because people are going full bore, they're working really hard. It's a very difficult thing. Sometimes people get tired, they make a mistake. So if you want to fire me, that would be fine. And he said, you're way too valuable. And I said, okay, if you choose to fire him, then I will resign my 2-week out, because that's totally inappropriate. And my job is to provide air cover. And he said, okay, we'll think about it. Called me back a little while later, says, okay, we're not going to go there. I go, okay, but the other thing is that he needs to have a future in this organization as well, if he chooses to stay. So, I don't want this to taint his record or anything like that. So anyways, those are a couple ways that I've used that leverage, always very strategic and always very cautiously, because, people aren't going to keep inviting you back if you are difficult to work with. And I think I actually have one that I missed. Oh, I did miss this one. Number 6, execute purpose aligned with minimal friction. That is my philosophy. So what that means is everything that I do, everything that I decide, every decision I make is aligned with the purpose of the project. I don't care about all the other noise, the politics of the organization, who did what, who hates who. I don't really care. Only time it comes into my realm of concern is if it's going to impact my ability to achieve the purpose of the project. The other thing is, you don't want to be executing in an environment where you're breaking things. You're like a bull in a china shop. You want things to go smoothly. I mean, that's the mark of professionalism, right? Is that it's unemotional, it's executed with professionalism. We give advance notice. There are no big surprises. If something happens, you're able to say, hey, risk such and such appeared, and it was on our risk register, and we had a mitigation strategy, and we're executing that mitigation strategy. That really reinforces your credibility versus you saying, oh my gosh, who could have known, right? that doesn't help quite as much. So anyway, just some tips and ideas to maybe help you be a little bit better. So let's start this conversation about uncertainty. You're uncertain. Why? Why are you uncertain? Well, it could be that the work has never been done by anybody before and is dissimilar to anything previously done by anyone. I mean, there's no way of creating an analogy or copying somebody, which is the greatest form of flattery. It's because nobody's done it before. And think about an example that comes to mind just really quickly, because I was watching the story of SpaceX and how when they were shooting their rockets up, they were having all kinds of problems with them. And their goal was to land the rocket back down on the launch pad, which was amazing. Nobody had ever done it before. So some of the techniques they were doing was parallel safe to fail experiments and iterating very quickly. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes on how that ties in. But that's some of the strategy you would use if you're doing something that nobody's ever done before. But that's not very many projects, especially for newer project managers. You wouldn't get those types of projects. You're going to get something that's a little more stable and predictable. It could be that it was done by someone before, but it's not easily repeatable. In other words, you need an expert. And I love that saying that an expert is somebody who's already made all the mistakes and learned from those mistakes, so you don't have to have them make the mistake on your project. It could be that it's been done by others, but not by you, in which case you want to copy, right? You want to see what they did, understand, learn from them, lessons learned, things like that, and copy as much as possible. Okay, so before you get too far into the uncertainty world, you need to understand what you're trying to even accomplish. And there's a technique called the logical framework approach that I ran across a number of years ago when I was trying to fix the fuzzy front end of a project for my client. It seemed like, they actually called me in to consult on, we always launch these projects and we spend, months bumping into each other before we figure out, okay, that's the direction we're supposed to go. Is there a better way? And I researched and it turns out there is. It's called the logical framework approach. And it's really about clarifying the fuzzy front end of your project to ensure you have a clean start. So you start off all in the same direction. And what it involves is revealing the explicit underlying logical structure of the project. Now, we inherently understand that there's an implicit logical backbone to the project, but what if we made it explicit? Then we could share it with everybody, and everybody could comment, did we get it right? So let's talk about that really quickly. It comes from a book called Strategic Project Management Made Simple. And up at the top, you'll see there's actually 2 books listed. The one on the left, which is the brown cover one, is the 2nd edition. I've never read it. The one on the right I have, and I reference it all the time. And it was written by Terry Schmidt, who is a member or has been a member for 20 years of the Puget Sound chapter. He's also a member of the Oregon chapter. And I took his class. So the funny story was, as I was doing the research, I came across this and I saw this. I then started to think, I wonder if anybody wrote any books about this. And so I did a search, and along came this little note that says, Terry Schmidt has wrote a book. And I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of weird. I know a Terry Schmidt. So I reached out to him and go, dude, did you ever write a book? He goes, yeah. I go, why wouldn't you have told me? Right. So anyway, he goes, I'm actually having a class next week on the methodology if you want to come. And I did. And it was in Oregon, and it was wonderful. So this is your superpower. And by the way, I've adapted this a little bit to make it sound a little bit better. Who wouldn't want to have a superpower, right? Who wouldn't? This is something that differentiates you from everyone in your organization. The better you are at this, the better you're going to be the go-to person, the value creator in your company. It's the ability to convert any problem, idea, or opportunity into clear objectives and action plans that can be smoothly and transparently implemented to reliably and predictably, I would add, achieve the desired results. And clarity is the key ingredient, the secret sauce. This is a very powerful capability if you can learn and master it. I strongly encourage it. And by the way, all these things that work at work, work at home as well. So you'll be the hero at home as well. The way it kind of lays out is looking at the top, there's a business or program goal that is, created, and somebody wants to get from point A to point B, and they go ahead and they go, create a project to do that. And we know the project is going to produce some outputs and deliverables based upon activities and resources. So that's the basic framework, but we actually read it upside down. The way it's read is this. We start at the bottom, and it says very simply, if we have the means, activity, and resources, then we should be able to produce the deliverables. Right? So if we have this, then we can create that. And if we create the outputs, we should achieve the project purpose. And if we achieve the project purpose, then we should achieve the business or program goal, or at the very least contribute to it. And the reason I say contribute is, remember, if each project only has one purpose and it requires multiple projects, which we collect together to make them a program, then each of those individual projects will contribute some to that overall goal, but you need to normally get them all done. That's the way you look at this, and you're like, well, that's easy. Okay, I understand. But there's a little more mystery here. And the mystery is this. There's this red line that goes right there, because below the red line, the what and the how, project deliverables, the means are usually under control of the project team. But the value is above the red line. The payoff, realized benefits, the achievement of the purpose. These are not directly under the control of the project team. And one of the challenges, again, that mantra that I say is, will the remaining work for the fit and remaining blah, 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 and still achieve the purpose of the project, is because over time you might learn that the deliverables that you create will not actually achieve the project purpose. It just doesn't work out. You'd think, of course it would, but what if it doesn't? An example, I used to work as a consultant at MCI Communications years ago, and I was working for a number of years in their sales organization. And every year they decided, hey, we want to increase revenues by 10%, sell 10% more stuff. What do we need to do? Hey, let's go train all the salespeople. We'll retrain them. And every year they retrained all the salespeople. Now it's solution selling, and this year it's something else. Guess what? It never moved the dial. It never made a difference. They could have saved their money. And that just goes to show you that sometimes you identify deliverables and you produce those deliverables, but it doesn't actually achieve the project purpose. So always important to kind of tie that back and be thinking about that. Just about done with this section. We'll pause for a second. All right. So the 4 strategic questions of every endeavor, whether it's getting married at home or, planning a vacation or running a project, are these. First one is, what are you trying to accomplish and why? And you might be thinking, oh, who cares why? My dad used to say, yours is not to reason why, yours is to do or die. Okay, Dad, that didn't work out so well. But anyway, the why, it turns out, actually helps define the what. If you know the what and the why, your vision or the clarity of the what becomes much more clear. And then how will you measure success? How do you know what done looks like? How do you know when you're done? And it turns out many times, if you were to ask your sponsor, I understand the what and the why. Now, how are we going to measure success? What does done really look like? When they explain the measures of success, it has forced me at times to go back and go, wow, I don't understand the what as well as I thought I did, because it will actually help you understand the what as well. Moving along, what are the other conditions that must exist or be true? Now, these are assumptions and risks that usually fall outside of your control. Okay, that's scary. Maybe I can't even influence. So if we don't control them, who does? Well, normally the biggest dog in the fight does, which is your sponsor. See how this all ties back? Get the biggest dog in the fight. Anyway, what are assumptions? Those are things that we treat as true that may not be true because we have a gap in information, so that we may move on. We create an assumption, say, well, we think it's this, or we think it's that. And maybe we create multiple scenarios and test those scenarios, because your assumptions generally create the greatest risk for your project. So the quicker you can knock those assumptions out and validate them, then you're much better off. And then finally, way down here at the bottom, how do you get there? The means and project management. Now notice, we're talking project management here. This is where most projects start. They don't start with question 1, 2, or 3. They go to number 4. So you could see why they're bumbling around, fumbling around, fuzzy front end, because they're not answering the questions in the order that they need to be answered. This is, again, amazingly powerful technique, and you will be very successful clarifying things and talking to stakeholders when you know this information. Now, this looks like a very busy slide, so I'm just going to show you really quickly. We're not going to decompose the whole thing, but here's the strategic questions up here. This is a template. You start out with the business goal, the project purpose, the outcomes, deliverables, the inputs, which are activities, responsibilities. It talks about how to measure these things here, the data source. I am giving you this template at the end if you live that long or last that long. So you will have this template. It's a Google Sheet. But the way I normally start off with this is over here you have something called a project charter. My project charter, which I'm going to give you that as well, is actually an interview guide. And it starts out with the purpose of the charter. Why the purpose of the charter? You'd be amazed at how many clients don't know what the charter is for. So they understand the importance of it once you go through that. But this little block right in here are the 4 strategic questions, so that they're front and center at the top of my charter interview form. And then I go through project title, project assigned authority. And the questions that are in my project charter are in simple speak. Who, what, where, when, that type of stuff. Very simple, very easy to think about and stimulate thinking so that you can answer to collect the right information. So I start with my project charter, then I fill out the logical framework. Then I go talk to the sponsor and the other key stakeholders and say, this is what I understand I think you want done. Are we close? And usually we're pretty darn close after a couple iterations. And then from there, I move the data over into their project charter. A lot of my customers are really big. They have their own charter format, which is wonderful. If I do my interview one, it'll answer all of their questions as well. So we're good to go on that. Okay, moving along here. This is just to show you what's available in the template slides. So how do you organize the work? You hear all the time, plan-driven, waterfall, hybrid, adaptive, agile. I mean, the best thing about agile is the name. I mean, who doesn't want to be agile? But if you only know one method, then it's like having a hammer and then all of a sudden everything you see looks like a nail because that's the only tool you got. Agile is just a tool. A waterfall is a methodology framework tool. So think of these as tools, and what's going to determine what tool to use is the nature of the work to be performed. So let's start to talk about that just a little bit. We have plan-driven, well-defined, and what the nature of that looks like is it's well-defined requirements, clear project scope, and relatively stable environments. And one of the stable elements needs to be the scope. The next one would be typically follows a linear sequential approach where each phase is completed before the next one begins, and the prior phase actually creates products for the subsequent phases. So imagine you're building a structure on an empty piece of property. Phase one might be to go prepare the grounds. Phase two would be to put the foundation, and phase three would be to put the structure on the foundation. And then phase four might be to make the structure habitable. That would be a perfect example of a very predictable, understood, sequential, linear, clear scope, stable environment. And another element is it's predictive, meaning that you can sit down and think through all the things that you need to do before you go turn the screwdriver. That's another element of plan-driven. And lastly, it's a methodology that deals very well with many dependencies. If you have a project that fits a little bit more into an adaptive world, but there's lots of dependencies, you probably should put it in a waterfall wrapper just to make sure you're on top of all those dependencies. Then let's contrast that with adaptive. These are environments, high levels of uncertainty and change, the stakeholder collaboration. The work stream is unpredictable. You must do some of the work before the remaining work even becomes visible. It requires innovation, creativity. An example would be like writing a book, product development, R&D, code development. If you're not using block code, would fall into that as well. You know, programs are thinking about, okay, I wonder how I'm going to do that. And every program might do it slightly differently. Those all would lend themselves to an adaptive type model, and you would use those tools. If you're in a more predictive environment, then you should know that there's something called the cone of uncertainty. And this is an example of it being used with the waterfall. And notice the cone of uncertainty collapses over time. As we move through time here and execute through the phases, the cone of uncertainty collapses. And that's very logical that it would, for a number of reasons. One, as we execute the work of the project, we start to learn a little bit more about what we didn't know before that we can apply into the future. So the risk starts to diminish a little bit there. But the main reason is that we do some of the work. And if there was risk attached to that work that didn't trigger, then once we've done the work, that risk is behind us. It's closed. It's out of there. And so that cone of uncertainty collapses. Now, in this first kind of pre-stage, what are we building? We're trying to figure out what we're doing. The values could be 2 to 4 times greater than what you would think. And I'm going to show you how to apply that really quickly. Then it drops down as we start learning more to 2 to 1.5 times, 1.5 to 1.25. And then in the development phase down here, you know, the difference is very tight, and you're probably a class 35 number, which means 25% to the top side, 10% to the bottom side. That's kind of budgetary range that you'd want to be in by that time, that level of precision. But even that is not like a single number. So just remember, give the range when you're working on it. But the fun way to talk about this, and I've done this on a number of times. So let's suppose a client comes to me and says, hey, you know, I've got this project. Last year during budgeting, we went ahead and did a budget estimate. We think it's going to be about $10 million, and it's going to take about 6 months. And right at that moment, because what happens is people anchor those numbers into their brain. So even after planning, if we came back and go, no, it's 22, they're going to be, why are you over budget? Well, we weren't over budget. You made up a number and it was the wrong number. So to help unlock that, I use this chart and I go, okay, so project management theory over many, many, many projects has come to determine that that number could be 4x. It could be, instead of 10 million, it might be $40 million project. And instead of 6 months, it might be 4 times that, which would be a 2-year project. Or it might be way down here. It might, instead of being 10 million, it might be only 250,000. Instead of being 6 months, you know, it'd be 25% of 6 months. What you're basically doing is you're starting to introduce them to this idea of there's a range of uncertainty, and that as you go through the process and you work the project, you're going to collapse the cone of uncertainty to get it into a zone where it's much more comfortable. In fact, if you look, this would be like the executing phase right here. And back this way, you're still in the planning phase. That's why on a waterfall project, you plan it all out so that you do collapse that cone of uncertainty to the point where it's a manageable range that's not going to freak people out too much. Anyway, that's just a thought. If you've never heard of the cone of uncertainty, this is kind of what it looks like. And now you have that in your toolkit to share. Here's another way of looking at it, uncertainty across the project lifecycle. And this is really just up. When it goes up, it's talking about the amount of risk and value of the risk. Coming across the top as we go through the planning, the project stage here, what you hope to see is that threats and opportunities, which are risks, positive and negative risk, actually start to go down. And because we start to clear up some of the confusion, some of the assumptions are vetted and validated. We know more. We shouldn't, necessarily jump off and start executing until that cone of uncertainty is collapsed to a range that is survivable by the company. And what I mean by that is if you're totally off, you don't want it to sink the company because you screwed the project up so bad. You need to have a certain amount of certainty. The amount of at stake goes up and the threats and opportunities goes down. And the reason you have that relationship is that the later in the process I am, when we decide, oh, we're not going to the right, we're going to the left, I have to throw away a bunch of work that was done and it has to be redone for the new direction. That's the cost goes up associated with that. And of course, when we get into the execution phase, we're buying materials and things like that. What if I bought a bunch of material that then we go, we're not going to do it that way. What do I do with that material? Maybe I can give it back, but you can see that those are costs that just start to compound. That's that in a nutshell. It's 5 o'clock on the dot. We're 45 minutes into this. I'm thinking this would be a good point to stop and take a break. Maybe take 5 minutes. Everybody's at their house, right? Run to the bathroom, get a glass of water, things like that. And if there's any pressing questions at this stage, I'd be happy to address some of those. Okay, so 5 o'clock. Let's just come back at 7 after 5 and I'll get started again. Okay. Does anybody see any chat questions that look like are pressing?
No, just a lot of like thumbs up and 100% true. Oh. Terry's awesome.
Hi, Ibrahim.
Yeah.
Ibrahim, sorry, off a little bit on the name. Good to see you. Yeah, Terry is awesome. So obviously somebody knows him. I like him as well.
Yeah.
I have those questions taped to my monitor from Terry's books. Good for you. That's exactly what I do. I mean, they're baked into my charter because of that. It's a brilliant book. And a little backstory, maybe people will jump on and get this from the video. The U.S. aid group in, I think it was 1960. The problem they were trying to solve is that the U.S. was giving all this foreign aid away and they weren't getting any results from it. And so they're like, bring in all the experts. Let's figure out how we can deal with that and make sure that we get a return on our money. And these experts came up with this logical framework concept. Oh, the title of Terry's book. Somebody asked that. So it's actually on the slide. And let me see, I can just come back to this real quick. It's Project Management Made Simple, right here. Practical Tools for Leaders and Teams by Terry Schmidt. Now, at this point, I would buy the second edition because, it's the most current one and you can pick it up on Amazon. And I think you can get it as an ebook, which makes it really nice as well. We left off on this slide right here where we're talking about uncertainty across the project lifecycle. So moving along with that, now we're going right into our uncertainty discussion. And I'm going to start out by talking about the spectrum. This is something I adapted from a bunch of different articles that kind of shared the story the way I thought it needed to be, the degrees of uncertainty. We start out on the far left of this continuum of the known things. And then we move into this category of unknown. And then finally, on the far right, we're in the unknowable category. As we walk through this step by step, I'll just kind of walk you from the left to the right. So on the far left, if something is known and is certain, then it's a known event and the probability is 100%. Well, we know that's not a risk because a risk has to have some probability that's less than 100% and greater than 0. So in this case, this would be a fact, right? And we would simply deal with it. As we move along, we have something called known risks. And this is where we have known events and known probabilities. And you're thinking, well, how do we know all that? It was probably because of analogies, right? We did similar projects, and so we knew what the events were, and when that event triggers, these are the probabilities, this is what it means. We learned it by copying, or we learned it through analogy. And as we move on over, now we're getting into more of the unknown stuff. And you can see we have something called uncertain risk, where we have a known event, but we're uncertain about the probabilities. And the probability is really the likelihood that it would happen. And as we move even further along the continuum, we start getting into ambiguous risk. And ambiguous, where it's an uncertain event and uncertain probabilities. So we obviously know less and less about these as we move along until we get to the next one, which is unidentified risk. It's something that's knowable, but it's not something that we currently know. So it's not yet identified. And then last, we move over to the very far right, where we're in the unidentifiable risk, because it cannot be identified because it's unknowable. And you're thinking, wow, I don't think I've ever run a project like that, and I hope you never have to, but we're going to talk about this in the Kuhn-Evans sense-making framework, and it'll help you think about how to approach such a situation. But here in the middle is where we play. So we play in this zone between known risks and unidentified risks to assess the risk by identifying the events and assigning probabilities. So when we're doing risk management, this is where we're playing. We're not playing in the outskirts of the unknowable stuff, and we're not playing in the known category, because those are facts. Here's how it plays out with project management approach. The more certain something is, going to the left, the more plan-driven and predictable it is, and that's the method or approach that we should be taking. The less certain it is, the further to the right we are towards the unknowable, the more adaptive we need to be, and ability to change on a dime and do some of the work to know what the rest of the work is. And we'll go through some other definitions that really lock this in for you. And of course, the reality is, if you work on a big project, it may be hybrid. You know, a big portion of it will be a waterfall. Other parts of it will be adaptive. And usually the adaptive stuff, if it's something you've never done before, is a small elite team. You know, we used to call them work projects, 55 years ago. Now they're talking about them as if it's, agile and things like that, which is wonderful. Just rebrand it, put new paint on it, and it works. But it really is all about a small elite team that's dedicated and focused on just that one element. And often what you'll do is you find these big areas of uncertainty in the project, and you throw a Scrum team at it and let them noodle that out so that they can basically take that and create a knowable element out of that for us that we can manage. That is one of the ways that those might work together. Okay, so now we're going to go into this Kuhn-Evans framework. And it's spelt Cinefin, which, from an English standpoint, we call it Cinefin, right? It's C-Y-N-E-F-I-N, Cinefin. But it's actually pronounced Kuhn-Evans. And by the way, I've heard more people argue about how this is actually pronounced, and I don't really care. So it's a sense-making framework developed by David Snowden and when he was at IBM. And it's a Welsh word, roughly translated to habitat or place. Now, apparently there's no direct English translation from the Welsh word. At the bottom, it says right here, the framework offers decision makers a sense of place to kind of stand from which to view their perceptions about their situation and how they want to approach it, which this is where it starts to get really cool. So how do you use it? Well, number one, it gives us the ability to look at the circumstances of your situation viewed through the lens of the frameworks, like putting on a pair of glasses. All of a sudden, things start to come into focus. Number two, you slot your situation into one or more domains described by the framework. And then number three, based upon which domain it is slotted in, the framework gives you an approach you can use to help you tackle your particular situation. And most important is this last note. The framework does not tell you the solution. Rather, it describes how you should approach your situation to improve your likelihood of a satisfactory outcome. Very cool. Just tell me the approach, because so many times the way you start and the way you run a project really affects the way it comes out in the end. So let's talk about how the Kuhn-Evans sense-making framework is built, and it's kind of cool. It draws on research in system theory, complexity theory, network theory, and learning theories. A lot of theories here. It begins by dividing a situation into one of three systems based upon how we perceive the situation's relationship with cause and effect. This is really cool how it starts to think about what is knowable, what's not knowable, what's cause and effect. And the three systems are the chaotic systems, complex systems, and the ordered systems. But just knowing this doesn't create a framework. So let's see what they did to create the framework. But before we move away from this slide, the slide talks a little bit more about the concept that on a chaotic system on the far left, it's unorderly. And when you go all the way to the right on ordered systems, it's very orderly. So what are the characteristics of that? Well, on unorderly, cause and effect is indeterminate. In a chaotic environment, you don't know what's causing stuff to happen. It's just happening. As you move next, you could see it's an unconstrained system, and you have a lot of random events happening that you can't explain. As we move on to the other side, we look at cause and effect is obvious. In the orderly world, cause and effect is obvious to most people. If you do this, then you get that. It's very predictable. It happens every time. It's really a nice relationship. As we move below that, this is a highly constrained system, and it's very predictable. Like I said, if you do the cause, you get the effect. So that's very nice. Here's how they take and translate it into a framework that's actually useful to us. The first thing they do is they take chaotic and they move it under the unorderly column below complex. Then they take ordered and they break it into two domains, complicated and observable. And then they add a fifth domain, which is called disorder. Now, if you look up the word unorderly and disorder, you're going to go, wow, those are synonyms. Why did they choose not to use disorder until this point? Well, it's because they wanted to use it at this point, right? So unorderly is a less common version of saying disorder. But to keep it straight here, we've got the 5 domains. And if you don't know where you're at, you're in disorder. And you start there and you work out from there. And we're going to walk through, and this is the way it's typically depicted. Again, as you can see at the top, we've got the unordered column here, complex and chaotic, and then under ordered, we got complicated and obvious. And I'll explain this little hook at the bottom here later. It's just really fun. So let's walk through it. We're going to start with obvious. What are the characteristics? First of all, how is cause and effect happening here? Well, first of all, cause and effect exists. It's predictable. It's repeatable. It's obvious to a reasonable person. You punch that person in the nose and you got a bloody nose. Okay, that's cause and effect. The decision model here, and this is where the rubber meets the road. How do you approach the situation? Is you sense what's going on, you categorize it based on, it belongs in this category here, and then you respond accordingly. And how do you respond? Well, you apply a best practice or standard operating procedure. The information is all known, so it's all known knowns, and there is a right answer. Not multiple right answers, but a right answer. An example would be like a first level help desk. Remember the old days, you used to call the help desk, say, I want a password reset, and they go, yeah, let us pull up the script. They validate who you are, and then they go, okay, do this, and then do this, and do this, and then they reset your password. And it is so simple and obvious that they totally automated it now. So each of you can go and change your password without human intervention because it's just running a routine, an algorithm. So very, very simple, very predictable, runs the same way each time. So now let's move up into the complicated area. And first of all, what's the story on cause and effect? Well, it exists, but it's separated in space and time, which means it's not necessarily obvious, not self-evident. Right. And maybe you need an expert to say, oh, yeah, we know that causes that. And the decision model here is you sense what's going on, you analyze, and then you respond. You use expert judgment, analysis, scenario plan, you apply good practice. Information is knowable, so we have known unknown. So we know that we don't know certain things, and that's an important element of where we're at. There's more than one right answer. And when you think about the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge, it's the 47 good practices. They didn't say best practices. For the old adage is, with a best practice, there can be only one. Right? Well, the reality is the PMBOK has methods and processes that are useful in almost every project, in every environment all the time, but not always. And is it the only way to do it? No, there's other practices that are similar, that do similar things. So these are good practices. This is a foundation of good practices for you to work with. Now, an example of this domain would be like an automobile. An automobile is very complicated, but an expert can take that completely apart and reassemble it without any extra pieces. I've never accomplished that, by the way, even on simple auto repairs. I always have extra screws and stuff, but a real expert could do that. So while it's complicated, an expert could do that. So that's an important distinction. So on the right-hand side, what we've covered so far is the ordered world. And on that side of the world, for the last 50 years, most of the methodologies and approaches and things like that are dealing with that side of the world, which is a logical backbone tied. It's, you know what cause and effect is, all that stuff. As we move across to complex, it starts to change. Now, what's going on with cause and effect? If perceptible, it's only in hindsight. So afterwards you go, oh my gosh, I guess that was what caused that, but you didn't know it in real time, which is unfortunate. Patterns emerge, but do not persist. We can see that a pattern is emerging, but in other words, it works sometimes, but it doesn't always work. It's unpredictable. The decision model here is probe, you sense, and you respond. Now, this is the domain of pattern management. The way you approach this is multiple safe-to-fail experiments, and you're applying emergent practice. There's many opinions. Information is coherent in retrospect. We have unknown unknowns. So we have things that we don't even know that we don't know. And so you could see this as a more perilous, more complex environment. And an example would be the stock market. If you were to take my class, you would see that one of the techniques we use, if you're a trader, is you create multiple safe-to-fail experiments, meaning that you don't invest so much money on one bet that if it goes wrong, it sinks your account. So multiple parallel safe-to-fail experiments. And when we find one that's working, we put more money on it and we amplify the effect. And if we make a position that's not working, we start taking the money away. We start dampening the effect, because why would you continue to feed a losing horse? You know, if it's a horse race, we want to put our money on the horse that is doing well. So market theory uses this very well. So let's go to chaotic now. As we look at chaotic, we are in a situation where cause and effect is indeterminate, scope is undefined. The decision model is act, sense, respond. And we use stability-focused interventions and crisis management and apply novel practice. Information is incoherent with unknowable unknowns. Can't even know them. So there's no good answer. An example of this would be a disaster. Now, I've been in a number of disasters because I was in the military and we would respond at times. And depending upon the situation, how unorderly was it? Right? Did law and order break down? Because it does break down if the situation is severe enough and it's not clear that there's going to be consequences. There's murders, there's stealing, there's rapes, there's all kinds of bad stuff happens. So again, the technique that you want is stability-focused interventions and crisis management. What you're trying to do very quickly is slam this into one of the other domains and get it out of chaotic. And that might mean that you declare martial law and you lock everything down. You super constrain things to get it under control. That's just some of the things to be thinking about. There's reasons why you want to use the chaotic domain at times, and you'll see that in subsequent slide. Here's a simplified view. As we look under the ordered side, you can see the obvious domain here is the domain of best practice. The complicated domain is the domain of experts. Again, think about the auto repair expert, and they could put the car back without any extra pieces. In the complex domain, it's the domain of emergence. And under chaotic, it's the domain of rapid response. Now that we know, and we're thinking about our project management approaches and methods, well, over here, we want to be in waterfall. In fact, we probably want to be in waterfall up through this whole side here. But as we move over here, this is much more adaptive over here. And certainly here, we're going to be throwing the whole kitchen sink at it. So as soon as we stabilize an element, we're going to throw it into waterfall, make it a little more predictable. And those that stay more chaotic, we're going to have to do this style up here, try to push it up into the complex domain where we're using parallel safe to fail experiments where we amplify what's working, dampen what doesn't. That's a couple quick ways of looking at this. There's a few more. And all I've done in this cheat sheet here for you is I've shaded all of these things and made them really, really condensed so you can read them. Because what we really want to talk about here is what are the constraints and bias. The obvious domain is tightly constrained with no degrees of freedom. Think about you're getting a password reset. That program is going to run the same way every time. No degrees of freedom. And we move into complicated, and we have something called governing constraints, and they're tightly coupled. So there is cause and effect separated by space and time, but it always happens. The cause actually causes the effect. And as we move the complex, we have enabling constraints that are loosely coupled. And then finally, we're lacking constraints and everything's decoupled in the chaotic zone. So how would you use that? Well, the people that like the obvious domain are admins, bureaucrats, people who live by process. When there's a problem, it's seen as a failure of process. When you live in the complicated domain, it's the domain of experts, right? Who think of analysis as the solution to their problems. Failures may be seen as insufficient time to analyze. As we move on over into complex, this is a really fluid and dynamic area. And so this is politicians, battle commanders, people comfortable working with nebulous flowing problems, good default domain. If you didn't know where to go and you're in disorder, you might jump into the complex and treat the problem as if it's a complex problem, but it's not as fast as using an expert. If you could drop over here and just use an expert and just have them give you the answer, that would be really nice. But over here, you're going to have to figure it out by probing, sensing, responding, and parallel safe to fail experiments. And then finally, down here at the bottom, it's the domain of dictators, autocrats, people who like to be in charge and do things their way. The downside to being in this domain very long is that your problem-solving skills can atrophy. And this is sometimes called the hero domain. And the reason is that let's suppose an autocrat wanted to take over a country and become a dictator. What they do is they drive the country into a crisis that they could then step forward and say, oh, I'm the hero. I can fix this problem for you. And just give me the power to do it. You can see how that might play out in certain circumstances. There's other good reasons to use the chaotic domain, and we'll show you that in just a second here. Now I'm going to show you the hook down here. And what this hook is representing is that if you're over here in this tightly constrained world and life is going on and you're bored as heck because nothing ever changes, nobody's paying attention. And then eventually the world slowly changes and eventually that thing's going to break. And when it does, it almost always falls into catastrophic failure from the over-constrained systems. And you're then going to have to stabilize that and move it into complicated or complex and start over. Some final thoughts related to how a PM might think about this. The more orderly a system is, the more constrained it is. Plan-driven is more orderly versus agile, which is less orderly. Cynefin is about movement and not categorization. Yes, under observable, we look to categorize because we're looking for a best practice to apply. But in general, it's not about categorization. It's about movement between the domains. It's not just putting things into the box. Really effective methods are moving things between domains. There's nothing good or bad about any of the domains. They're equally good or bad. It's all about contextual. Fundamentally, the main driver is to move between complex and complicated. Why is that? Again, remember, complex is up here and complicated is over here. So we want to move in this area up here. And the reason we want to be up there is because it's a safer place to be. We're either dealing with experts that know the answer, and if they don't, then we're going to be doing safe to fail experiments, and we're going to have emergent process there, and we're going to figure it out. It's a lot safer than assuming that you're down in the observable range and you get smacked upside the head because it's not that predictable after all. That's where people typically move back and forth between. It's kind of a constant rotation. Now, this concept here is really important. It's this idea that you relax the constraints so new possibilities emerge. And as the possibilities prove themselves, you then increase the constraints to exploit the result. What they're doing is using that technique to figure out the path. And once they know the path and that the path is going to persist long enough, then you try to exploit it. And that goes back to, like I said, with investing. If you're investing in a trend and the trend is continuing to run, you continue to throw money into it because your money then will amplify and grow. But if you're investing what you thought was a trend that's starting to falter and fail, then you want to start pulling your money off that opportunity and look for another opportunity that looks more rewarding. There's this constant rotation. If you need to do a reset, you may need to do a shallow dive into chaotic, which is a radical removal of all constraints. What do you hear all the time from politicians is, hey, we need to go through deregulation. So why are they talking about deregulations? Because over the years, that's all senators and House of Representative people do is they create new laws. And if nobody takes some of those laws away, pretty soon we're so constrained that everything we do is illegal. So to fix that problem, we need to remove some of these constraints and allow the process uncoupled, unrestrained movement forward. And then, what ends up happening is you now start to constrain it again. Only a small amount of stuff goes in the obvious domain because things are not always that predictable. And these are things that are relatively static that you don't anticipate the change. In the complex space, you probe, sense, respond. These could be multiple, parallel, safe to fail interventions. I keep wanting to reiterate that point because that's really what you're doing when you're doing discovery in an environment. You're trying out different things and seeing if they work. And if they don't work, you dampen the experiment. And if they work, you amplify it. And this actually talks to that. But it cautions you that, hey, experimental design requires that you know this before you start the experiment. If you're going to do an experiment and you're thinking, well, I'll just dampen it if it doesn't work, but you don't know how to dampen it, then you just launch something that might kill you. So you got to be really careful. That it's kind of like AI. Is AI going to kill us? It very well might. I've been a technologist for over 40 years. It's the most exciting and the most scary technology I've seen. As we move to the last one, we can often solve problems by solving something related. So one of the experiments could be to solve a related problem. That might be a little bit easier and give you enough clues of how things work so that you can then solve the main problem. Now, I had mentioned that when you're talking about the domain here and you break it down in half, and this is the orderly side and this is the disorderly side, that over the last 50 years, almost all of the methods designed were around the orderly stuff. So we don't have that much methods that work on the chaotic and the complex side. Obviously we got adaptive and agile and things like that that are emerging. But this is one methodology that has been proven to work across all domains. It's called the OODA loop, and it stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And I'm not going to go through this any more than this. I just wanted to tee you up to that so that's in the back of your mind if you ever want to explore this. And if you were to take my investing class, one of the things we have to do is determine what the mood of the market is. The market taking money or giving it away. And so I called it MUDA, which stands for market OODA. So you're looking at the market, you're observing it, you're getting oriented to the market, you're making a decision, you're acting, and that act is probably going to be a parallel safe to fail test. And you'll see the results and you do it again. So anyway, that's how you might use that in the environment. Okay, so we're at 5:34, marching towards 6.
Hey, Darrel. There's an anonymous question.
Yeah.
What are some of the common mistakes when applying Cunefin? Is it Cunefin in project management?
Cunefin.
Okay. So,
but however you want to call it, I don't really care.
Cunefin. That's what I'll say.
Cunefin, right. Well, I bet you're going to get a lot of pushback on that. So at least try to make it something.
Cunefin. There you go.
Right? Okay.
What are some of the common mistakes when applying Cunefin in project management?
The most common one would be that you think you're in an environment which is highly predictive and it's not, and you don't discover it until late in the process. So if you went full bore and literally didn't identify the situation that you're really in. The other thing to consider is that in a project, you have multiple situations. Some elements of those will be in different domains. So what we're trying to do is give you a framework to start to think through this. And when you see big bodies of activity that's highly unpredictable, you got to do some of the work to figure out what the rest of the work is. You see patterns emerging, but then they dissipate. You don't understand what's causing them. Cause and effect, if known, is in retrospect only. Well, that's too late. By then, the project has failed. So it's just a matter of thinking through. I'm a big believer in thinking, taking the time to think and pause, do your logical framework, understand where you're trying to go. try to apply a logical backbone if it doesn't seem to fit all aspects of the project because you have such a wide range of uncertainty. Then go to the Kuhn-Evans sense-making framework and start walking through your understanding of the information, what's known and unknown, and cause and effect. And that's going to get you into the zone. And then it's going to tell you what the approach is. Remember, it says it's going to be like sense, act, whatever. Does that help? Let's go ahead and just breeze right towards our destination and go home. So what I'm going to cover here really quick is basics of risk management. And this should be review for most people. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Like, for example, there are slides here where people can just read the definition. What is a threat? What is an opportunity? Obviously, a threat's something negative and opportunity is something positive, and PMI has both positive and negative risks, and we want to deal with both of them. And a triggered condition lets us know that a risk actually materialized. When to perform project or risk management? Well, in general, you should be thinking about it over the entire life cycle of the project. From first time I get the project, I start thinking about it. But the reality is that you get into heavy risk planning during the planning phase because you need to know the work. If you don't know the activities, the work that's going to be performed, then you don't know the risks that doing those activities will create. The old adage is if you touch it, you break it, right? So, when you do work, you create risk. And what is really cool is because if you have a time phase budget, right, or a time phase risk register, if you know when the risk or the work is going to be performed, therefore you know when the risk is going to emerge, you can have a time phase risk budget of sense, right? And you can get really good visibility into that. And your risk should change as the project goes on. I'll show you an example of that. Anyways, then you go into monitoring and management throughout the execution phase. But don't forget, anybody throws in a change order that takes work away or adds work to it, you better assess the risk of doing that work. So the process is as follows. I'm going to hit this really quick. You start out by saying, what do I want to do about risk? How tolerant is the organization to risk? Do they want to spend a lot of time on it? And my financial customers always wanted to spend lots of time because they're heavily regulated at all levels. They have risk officers at various levels. And so, obviously they want to hit it with a sledgehammer. But I also worked at Microsoft in the late 80s, and their approach at that time was, we don't want to waste time doing risk planning. We want to go full bore. And if we hit an immovable object, we'll try to go around it or over it. And if we can't, then we'll back away and do something else. And so they wanted to quickly get to the problem if they're going to run into one, which nothing wrong with that. They're traveling at really high speed and they had lots of money. Now, more recent times at Microsoft, they're definitely going through a more rigorous risk management process. So first is plan. How do we want to approach it? Then we need to identify the risks. Now you can use Bing, DuckDuckGo, or Google, or now you can use ChatGPT, or you can use Microsoft Copilot and say, I'm doing this type of project. What are some common risks that I need to be aware of? And what you're trying to do is throw a bunch of risks in the container that you're then going to evaluate. And remember, again, most of the risk comes from the work you're performing. So go check the work. Then you want to analyze that risk, and you want to think about first t-shirt sizes. How big is it? Because I want to know that, because I don't want to waste my time trying to quantify risks that are really low risks. I don't want to waste my time on it. So I really only want yellow and red risks, maybe just red risks where I quantify them. And then I need to plan my response. And then for threats, we want to avoid, transfer, mitigate, accept, share, escalate. And opportunities, we want to enhance, exploit, escalate. Escalate just means move it up the chain of command, make them aware of it, see if they want to do something different with it, that type of stuff. And then we want to implement the response, because it will appear in your project plan. It had better appear in your project plan. And that's one of the things when I'm auditing project plans is I look to see if it actually manifested into the project plan. And I've got a couple slides that's going to show you how that ties together for you. Then we monitor for risks, and then we repeat the process, and it's a circle. We're always scanning the environment for, risks, new risks that might be emerging. And part of this is, as we execute the project, we get smarter, I hope, and we apply that knowledge either by better evaluation of our risk profile or avoiding risks more readily, those types of things. At the end of the day, you want to ask the key question: do you understand how risk is incorporated into your project management plan? And I'm going to go into that here in just a minute. Here's some areas to consider to include in your thinking about where risk is. And notice at the very bottom, I've got one highlighted in red, which is the thing that's caused almost all the major risk in my projects. It's been the interface between people, between processes, and between technology. And in particular, if you're making changes to an existing environment, over time, the people that remember the technical interfaces go away. They get promoted, they win the lottery, they get hit by a bus, who knows what happens, they disappear. So nobody knows about that interface. Same thing with processes. I mean, you go into a department, you're going to change the department by implementing some automation, and you ask 10 people, well, what's the process for this? And you get 10 different answers because nobody knows, everybody does their own thing. So people, process, technology, interfaces, pay attention to those. Now, you can read these. This is right out of Pinbox, is the concept of risk appetite, risk tolerance, risk thresholds. So, again, really when you're talking about risk thresholds, we're talking about one of two things. Typically, if it's too low of risk, we're just going to accept it and we're not going to waste a lot of time on it unless it changes, morphs into something bigger. If it's above the threshold, then we're going to have to do something with it. We're going to have to put a plan to mitigate it, put something into our budgets. We have two budgets. We have a time budget. We have a dollar budget, and it should be manifested in both of those. And I'll show you how in a few minutes. The other thing is the overall risk tolerance for the organization. Now, the only organizations I've ever worked for that followed that were highly regulated financial institutions, where they would have rules that said, okay, based upon how risky the project is, we can only have 2 of those in flight at any given moment. And that's it. You can only do 2 big projects at a time because we're not willing to take on that much risk. And so other than that, most organizations are like, oh, heck yeah, just go full bore ahead. Okay, so let's look at an example risk register and look at this was actually one used with the client. We got a category, we got an ID, we got the risk event description, the owner, and then we have these 3 important columns: probability, impact, and then the score, which is probability times impact. 2 times 3 is 6. You can see how we got the score, and then the status. And the status, we'll go through that in a second. And then response, strategy, proactive, reactive. And just to drill this out, when you get your PDF, it's going to have these descriptors in it, like this will be built out for you so you can look. And so the first thing you see under probability is a 1 means 1 to 20%, 2, 21 to 40%. And this is a 5x5 matrix we're building out, which is super common. Now, I prefer a 3x3 matrix. And the reason is I don't think there's any expert that can tell me the difference between a 1 and a 2 if it's the difference between 20% and 21%. So, I like to have just 75%, 50%, or 25%. And I keep it really simple. Moving along, I really like this customer's description. This was their risk register. So number 1 was minor annoyance, may require minor workaround. Number 2 was low visibility, visible only to the working team. Number 3 was moderate, which means limited visibility to outside customers. Number 4 starts getting really scary, very significant, but the possibility exists that we could recover. And number 5 is, hey, we're flirting with disaster. It could be a organizational showstopper. You never want to be into those categories. But anyway, you can see how this kind of builds out. To get the probability score, as I said, it's probability times impact. The risk event status here is D for dormant. Think of dormant like a volcano. It could always erupt. It means it's a risk that's ahead of you still. T means triggered, which means, hey, it's here. And C means closed, which means it was a risk that either triggered or didn't trigger, but in any case, the work is behind you, so the risk is behind you. And then lastly, what strategy do you want? Do you want to accept it, avoid it, transfer it, mitigate? And with mitigate, you can minimize impact or you can minimize probability or both. Okay, and here's the way it normally looks for qualification. Remember, t-shirt sizes. And in this case, we're looking at this 5x5 matrix. So you could see this one's a 4. So it's a 4 here. So that would be a green risk. And anyway, when you compile all these risks and total them all up, you would have a total project risk profile. In this case, there are only 3 risks, just to illustrate the chart here. There's 1 low, 1 moderate, 1 high, but normally I'm tracking like 80 risks or 90 risks and at the beginning of a project. And as we go through the project, those risks start going away because they're behind us. And so the numbers change around. But what you want to have is you want to have mostly green risks, some yellow risks, and only a few red risks. If you have mostly red risks, you got a very risky project, and you better figure out how you're going to, tone that down, control that risk somehow. Okay, here's one that actually does both qualify, the t-shirt size, as well as quantify. And it's important to note, and this, by the way, is on the WASDOT website, and you can actually download the template. So here's how it happens really quickly is across one row here, we're looking at cost, and they're doing a min, max, and most likely, which is 3-point estimating. And then they take those numbers and they run them through the min plus 4 times the most likely plus the max times the probability, and it gives you the score. And that score is brought down, and actually when you sum up all the risks, that score should come down and show up as a contingency reserve from your risk register. And it says 0, but it should be at least 4.8 million plus all the other ones that have been quantified, right? And so that's one row going on there. The next row here is the schedule. And you could see, again, they did min, max, and most likely. So 0 months, 4 months, or 3 months. And then they use that same formula, min plus 4 times the most likely plus the max, and they got 1.9 months. And again, when you total up all of these in your risk register, they should come down and be added to your time budget as a risk buffer. Now, where you decide to put the buffer is up to you. It could be around the event so that they're kind of coupled, so that you could, in theory, take that buffer out after you've passed that work. Or what most people do, they're lazy and they just throw it in at the end. So you could see, here's an example that's just sitting here at the end, and it gave me 10 days buffer. And so it pushed all the activity starting 10 days early. So that's how that would work. So again, you need to quantify this stuff. And so let's step back just a moment, because you don't want to quantify everything. Normally what you do is you quantify all of the red stuff. And then, dependent upon your organization's tolerance for risk, you may quantify the yellow stuff. You never quantify the green stuff. You just accept that risk. So again, if your relationship is that 60% of your risk is green, you don't even have to worry about it other than to check it every once in a while, make sure it didn't morph into something different. The stuff that's yellow and red, go ahead and quantify that. It should then show up in your dollar budget, and it should show up in your time budget. Okay. And moving along, the bonus stuff at the back, and then we'll take time for questions here. If you go to this website, and I'll talk about the limited lifetime warranty at the same time, it's going to take you to this site right here. And the first thing I would encourage you to do is to come down here to where it says template, PM template registration. And if you do it, you fill out this little registration form. Now, the only reason, I promise I will never send you anything except to say maybe we moved where the data is at. And so that's the only reason I collect this, is we're currently in a migration from EVC training.spaythmanagement.com over to my longer term site, which is going to be sensibleprojectmanagement.com. So eventually this will all live there. But if you come over here, you can't currently see it because I'm not signed in, but I'm going to click into it really quickly. So you can see that I've got business case example, I've got core project templates, I've got project roles and responsibilities, I've got some resume template examples for some of my folks, and system development lifecycle templates, and then of course the famous getting things done with David Allen, which I really love. That's a methodology that I use. And so under the core templates, again, these are all the templates that I use. You can see the log frame here. You can see the project charter example here. And you can just copy these over. So you need a Google account. So send me, when you register, give me a Gmail address, and my admin will activate you and let you know that you have permissions. And then just copy the stuff over that you want. So you come up and you say file, make a copy, and it'll copy it to your drive if you want, and you'll have that. So lots of fun stuff there that I think would be useful for you to go check out and maybe accelerate. Even if you don't use it in your company, if you use it to prepare the way you're thinking about stuff, that's very useful. And then the other thing that I would encourage you to look at is my lifetime warranty. And it's really a limited lifetime warranty, which means it's my lifetime, not yours, because I'm going to expire sooner than you, probably. but it's a pay it forward model. I will help you, but in return, there will come a person one day passing your desk that you could help. Please help that person for free as well and pass it forward. And again, these are the different areas: career planning, job search, mentoring, training, problem solving, business acumen, investing, free lunch and learns. I do those for companies. Your credibility, resume, LinkedIn profile, all that stuff, and tools, getting connected. So again, if you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to move yourself to the next level, you want some free mentoring, reach out. When you do that, right down here, it shows you how to connect. And right here, it's got schedule 30 minutes with Darrel. If you click on that, it will show you my calendar. You pick the slot that you want. If you need more than 30 minutes, pick a slot that has the time slot available right behind it. And then what I'll do is I'll just expand the meeting to 1 hour. Usually that's all we need. Okay, let's go back and see what kind of questions we might have as we're wrapping up. Oh, one more thing is that at the very end here in the appendix area, I've got a risk description format that I love from Dr. Brown, SEBA Solutions. A good risk statement follows: if blank happens, then there will be impact to blank. And this is extremely important when you have thousands of risks. And, you know, a year later, you look at the risk, you're like, what did we mean? What is that risk, right? So his format works really well for that. So consider that. Here's some risk management considerations you can read on your own. Again, this is in the appendix. Here's a simple delivery cheat sheet that I use. And importance is right down here. Is after you've done that column, you've initiated the what. Do we have sufficient understanding to start to work at a project? Do we have the approval to begin to work? When you do the next segment of work, you should be, do we know what we will deliver and the work necessary to produce deliverables? And you can read this on your own. It's a cheat sheet. So, okay, let's jump to any questions you might all have. Oh, and here's another view of the uncertainty spectrum, a little bit different flavor, but yeah, the one that I used in the presentation is probably the best. Questions?
Questions. To sustain in project management area while AI is doing lots of project management work, what should we do?
Learn as much as you can about AI. So what the early iterations of AI are going to be like an extension of your capability. And so by being able to, it's like when the calculator first came out, you know, people were like, oh, should we use a calculator? Should we learn how to do math the long way? Well, who the heck wants to do it the long way? Let's just use the calculator. So it didn't replace mathematicians. It just helped people who are not mathematicians do math in a sensible way. And AI is developing that same way. So initially, AI is going to be an extension, an augmentation of your capability. Could it in a scary future replace you? Yes. The people that are at the least risk of being replaced are the people that know how to use the tools that can maximize their capability. And it's going to be a while before AI gets to the point where it could totally replace a very good project manager.
I love that. I can relate so much to it. I have a PhD in math and I love that analogy.
Okay.
Next question.
Good.
How do you deal with senior leadership that pushes back on complex risk strategy, scoring matrix? I have had some leaders think these are too complicated and don't understand the value.
So my philosophy through 35 years of running projects has always been be transparent. And one of the executives that I work with early on, I learned so much from. He was really tough. And I went to present a project with him one time and he goes, hey, I go, it's going to be this amount of money. It's going to be this amount of time. He goes, okay, tell me what I can have for half that cost and half that time. I was like stumped because I wasn't prepared for that. But trust me, I always had that answer in my pocket in the future, is that this is what you get for doing that. And the same thing is true on anything that you're trying to present. So learn the 5-step proposal model, which is current environment, proposed environment, the alternatives, starting with alternative 0. What's the cost of doing nothing? And then here's the cost of doing something. Because if the cost of doing nothing is less than the cost of doing something, guess what they're going to do? They're going to do nothing. And then what's your recommendation? Here's kind of a timeline. So when you start to think in that way, that's the way management thinks. So when you're going to an executive and the executive is able to outflank you and you're the expert, there's a problem there. So you need to anticipate what that executive, who's not a project management expert usually, where they're thinking and how they're thinking. They're thinking about how do they minimize risk? How do they get to from point A to point B as quickly and efficiently as possible? How do they achieve the purpose of the project? They're thinking about those types of things. And so when you bring in and you say, hey, this is the nature of the work. Some of the work is predictable, some of it's unpredictable. So this is the approach that we need to take to maximize our opportunity. And everything in my world has a place. Let me show you something else on this. If you go under classes, and I have to fix this chart, but when I do, it's this thing right here, which shows you the 5 domains, process domains, PMI, initiating, planning, executing, monitor, controlling. And by the way, when this is working, you can click on it, it opens up and it walks you through it. And I usually do it. Here's 5 minutes of waterfall, cradle to grave, right? And the point I'm making with this is that when you operate transparently and you have the facts at your fingertips and you have the reason why, and you're following a methodology that's a good practice, every one of these elements in this matrix, this spoke that you see, has a container. So something always goes someplace. And your job as a project manager is to be more organized. And again, so it's really rare. If the executive has a good reason, then maybe you should go back and study and figure out why that didn't come into your thinking, right? But normally they default to where they're comfortable, which means they've been someplace. I was at a executive meeting one time, a board of directors, and one of the board members said, hey, how come you're using Gantt charts and not a burn down chart? And I said, well, it's because we're doing an infrastructure project, which has lots of dependencies, and it's a predictive work stream, and predictive work streams lend themselves to plan driven much more efficiently than an adaptive style, which is where you get a burn down chart, right? So if the nature of the work was this, then I would be here saying, yeah, here's a burn down chart, but that's not the nature of the work. And again, if you're speaking from a knowledge source, then it normally goes really well. You need to sound confident.
Thanks for that tip, Darrel. So there's another, it's not a question. So Elizabeth was not able to grab the handouts and she had to reload, you remember? And it took about 45 minutes. Geez, Elizabeth, we are so sorry about that. But I'm glad you're back. Wow. You are back, and I'm glad that it's being recorded. So, all right.
So again, remember that when you do get the handouts, in the upper right-hand corner, you can click on the link that'll take you to the EVC training website. That's Everett Community College training site, for me, my personal one. But the important thing is you can go down to the contact area and schedule a meeting with me, and I will address any questions that you have that you might have missed, or things that you see in the video. They're like, wow, I wish I had more information.
And just to share for the audience here, so on the right corner, there's a question mark, chat box, and right below that is the handout section. So you click and you get the presentation. All right.
Absolutely.
Another question. How do you grow a small dog sponsor to grow into a big dog sponsor, since I do not get to choose my sponsors?
What you need to do, and again, remember I'm talking about the containers, because the containers are a big part of how I manage sponsors and executives. So everything's transparent. So we have a decision log, we have a risk register, we have a recommended approach based upon, the nature of the work, things like that. So if I go to an executive and the executive does not have the right level of sponsorship, and by the way, they're very ego-oriented, so you have to handle this very gently. You can't say, wow, you're not the biggest dog and I need a bigger dog. They won't know what you're talking about, but you're basically saying you don't have the power that I need you to have. So what you do is you explain that the project actually spans multiple domains outside of that person's range of authority, their domain of control, their span of control. And there's resources that we need from these other departments. So how are we going to get those if we don't have that person with skin in the game? If they're not, one of the ways that you can avoid an executive getting in your way is by put them on the train, because they won't derail the train if they're on the train, which means their fingerprints are on the project. So figure out a way to get them involved and say, hey, we need you as a sponsor. And again, it truly is a political thing, because you're going to have to convince the person who thinks they could be the sponsor that they need to have co-sponsorship. But generally, if you talk that through gently and explain the reasons why, and then I always say, but it's your decision, and whatever you decide will be captured in the decision log. And if the decision is going to increase risk, then we'll have a risk in the risk register that said the sponsor is not at the right level, and as a result, and these things might happen, and we'll be tracking that as a risk, and we'll be reporting that on the status reports to everybody in the organization. How do you want to handle it? So you can see that it's all about, you have a process I'm following, I'm required to follow this process, it's a methodology that's proven, and here's the way we're going to go about doing it. And I've had people say, I don't want that decision in the decision log. Okay, well, in the risk register, we now have a risk that says some of the decisions are not being captured in the risk or in the decision log. This is what it means to the project, right? So there should be no place to hide.
Thanks, Darrel. Darrel, we are over time, and we do have some follow-up question, but I think maybe people can reach out to you directly.
Sure.
And I'm dropping down the PDU claim code for tonight. And thank you so much,
Okay.
Darrel. Yep.
I'm actually okay staying a little bit longer if you have that opportunity.
Sure. So I just dropped down the PDU claim code for our audience. And thank you, Darrel, for an enlightening session. Thank you all for joining tonight. We are open right now for any questions that you have. You're welcome to stay back. Before we do that, Wendy, can we announce the prizes for the gamification before everybody leaves?
Oh, yes. That is let me take a look here. That is a good one to ask.
And everybody, we do have some sessions tomorrow as well. So hoping that we will see you tomorrow.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. We have winners. The number one is Elizabeth Adams.
Woohoo! Congratulations, Elizabeth.
You got 220 points. Ryan Zing, number
Woohoo! 2. Congratulations, Ryan.
And then Stephen Barnes, 140.
Congratulations, Stephen.
And we have your emails, and what I'll do is send the Amazon gift cards directly to your emails.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Congratulations, everyone. And I hope to see you all again. It's our last day of Professional Development Days. And have a good night. And people who have questions, please stay back.
We have another day tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And if you would like to speak and get out on the mic, you can request to speak, and Neha can actually allow for that.
Sure. Feel free to, if you want to speak, you can request to speak, and I'll accept that. Darrel, there was a follow-up question that I saw in chat box. It says, how to manage up towards executives who are disengaged or key stakeholders who are very creative without much grounding in reality?
Wow. Yeah, that's always a terrible challenge. Part of, and I'm going to answer it a couple different ways. One of those is that when I go into an organization, I have the flexibility of evaluating the organization before I sign my contract. And I will not often, but on occasion, I've decided not to go through with that client. And the reason is that there were not enough success factors in place for me to feel that the probability of a successful conclusion of the project was sufficient for me to put my name on it. And I know that you don't always have that ability, but again, if you go through that logical framework at the beginning of the project and really understand what you're trying to accomplish, and then you start going through the planning steps, figuring out how you're going to organize the work and what that is, and what the risk is associated with that, and who the kind of players are in the organization, it can be very helpful so that when you're starting to have conversations with executives, you're telling them things that are meaningful to them. I mean, so here's one example is after we do the planning phase, before we actually sign off the plan, I have my kickoff meeting right then. And I pull together all of the key stakeholders that are part of it, including executives that I think need to be part of that story, right? And we do a brainstorming exercise. It's called a pre-mortem, right? So what you're doing is you're writing the epitaph of why the project failed before we even did any of the work of the project, right? And it's meant to be a fun exercise. And, I normally have a box of candy. And if you ask a question, I throw it. And, eventually you get a sugar rush going and you're starting to really throw stuff out there and people see it as a game. And things come out in that meeting that are like, we don't document the name because they might get fired. It'll be things like, well, our CFO always messes this up, right? And so what do I do with that information is it's going to eventually land in the risk register. And I'm going to go talk to that CFO. And I'm going to say, hey, we're brainstorming and, this is one of the things that came up as something that derailed projects in the past. And it was you. And it was this behavior. So how can we avoid that on this project? And of course, the very first thing they say is, who said that? And I say, I'm new here. I don't know anybody. There was somebody in the crowd. So anyway, I try to deal with those things really head on and as transparently as possible and as politely and respectfully as possible. So you have to, grease the skids. You have to be head on. And, if it just becomes clear to me that there's not a sufficient amount of support in the organization, either the sponsor's not at the right level or what have you. And as an example, I gave you earlier where that company hired my company to select and implement. I said, okay, my company will do the select part. I want a separate contract for the implement, and we're not going to sign that until we're done with the first project. And the reason is I had a sense that organization, I don't want to name the organization, but that they were not going to be successful, that there was too many roadblocks in the mentality of the people. First of all, some of the managers were not the brightest ducks in the pond, and it was really obvious, and they were in positions of authority. And so I first had to assess whether or not I could be successful. And one of the things I did is I called all the executive, I got invited to the executive meeting, and we sat around and I went through that, which says, hey, I'm concerned about this and I'm concerned about this. And I've done a number of projects and this project's going to fail on its face. And I waited. The CEO was there, the CFO, all these people were there that should have been all over me. They should have said, Darrel, you don't know what you're talking about, or Darrel, this is not the way it is, or it was silence. It's like, are you all awake? Did you just hear me say that I'm an expert and I've been in here, I assess your organization, your probability of success is very low unless you're willing to make some changes. And not a single one of you asked me what that change would be. So what ended up happening with that company is I felt that my team, along with the people that I had to work with, could control enough in the selection process to effectively do that. But we refused to do the implementation is what ended up happening. And so that's how we proceeded. Again, you don't always have that flexibility. Sometimes it's like the game is rigged against you. You learn all these techniques to make the probabilities land in your favor, the wind's at your back, and then you get people in the organization that are going to be blockers. And again, the one adage I gave you earlier is that an executive will not derail the train if they're on the train. So you have to figure out, how do I bring that person into the project team? So if the project fails, their name is on that failure as well, because most of these executives are looking upward, figuring out, hey, how could I become chief operating officer and chief executive officer? And they don't want those failures attached to their name. So again, it's about working with them, and sometimes there's so low trust in the organization that you have to establish the trust. And that's done by going back to PMI's code, you know, honesty, blah, 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 right? And don't say blah, 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 by the way. That's not very compelling. But actually sell them on the fact that this is in high integrity and you're a higher integrity individual, and that your job is to make them look good. And, you know, maybe you'll get some traction there. And if you don't, then you should probably look for a different job. I mean, who wants to be in an organization where you're going to fail all the time?
Love that, Darrel. Thank you for sharing. I would like to invite everybody, if they feel free, they can unmute, turn their camera on, and we can have a discussion. Any questions, anybody? Feel free to speak. Going 3, going 2. Okay, we have Elizabeth. Yep. Yes.
Elizabeth, come on
Yeah,
down.
and congratulations for being the first winner.
Are you online, Elizabeth?
Yeah, this is Asma.
Hi, Asma.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had a question about the poll.
Go ahead.
Are we going to do, I mean, I did that, but we didn't discuss it. So were we supposed to do it, or what was it about? I mean, like.
I'm not exactly sure what the question
No,
is.
you had
I'm
a
sorry,
poll about the 2 questions related to the risks. Poll 1, poll 2. Question 1, and the second question.
Oh, is there?
I think we forgot.
Did the poll launch?
I think we forgot.
Oh, yeah. You know, that might have launched all by itself. Yeah, I had some poll questions, but then I didn't launch them.
Yeah, I don't think we used them tonight. Yeah.
I didn't use them. So there was 2 that say view results. I think I accidentally launched them and I didn't intend to. So yeah, there is no answer to them unless you just want me to give you the answer.
Oh, I did them. So maybe I was the only one.
Oh, you did them. Hey, you are special. So did you do the first one? You have just completed your identify risk activities. Is that the one you did?
I did both.
Okay. So what is the answer to the first one? Let's see. You have completed your identify risk and are about to post your documents of the project. Which are the postings as an output of your efforts? It's going to be number 1, the risk register and log. Yeah. You know, it's going to capture basically the activity of the.
Darrel, do you want to launch the poll now for rest of the audience? I don't know.
Mine just says view results.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Can I show results? Let me go next.
So for rest of the audience, if you see
let me start the poll again. Okay, I just started it again.
All right. And Elizabeth, did you want to speak as well? I think I did provide you access. Feel free to unmute.
Oh. Wow, I got poll number 3 up too. So I'm not doing so well with these polls.
Oh, that's fine. I just got 1 and 2, so I did 1 and 2 and I asked you about them.
Okay, so I'm just going to hold off on that poll thing. Just forget the poll thing.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. 2 things. One for you, Nia, is I'm just completely at sea as to how I get these PDUs over to PMI. So if maybe tomorrow, you know, if there's a set of instructions somewhere, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3 about how we do that.
We can email that. Elizabeth, we can email you that. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Okay, that's great. And then the second thing for you, Darrel, is I'm already sitting like a bump on a pickle on my very first volunteer thing. I've been going through physical therapy up at the Mason Hospital in Shelton, and they have a job offer on Indeed for a project manager. And, you know, I don't feel comfortable applying in a situation where I still have therapy to get through from this workplace injury, but I can certainly function as a volunteer, and I am so prepared for this. So I just wanted to thank you for everything. I got the PDF. I'm going to listen to the replay because trying to refresh the screen took out most of what you had to say here just recently. So anyway, if I bump into any roadblocks, I will definitely reach out to you because I would just love to do this volunteer.
So, you know, maybe what you should also do is, you know, basically you're introducing yourself to them when you apply for a job. What you could potentially do is say, I'd love to apply to this project manager job. I think I could do it really well, but this is where I'm at in my current situation, you know, medical situation, and see if they would work with you. And if not, then say, hey, you know, maybe if you're looking for somebody who can hit the ground running full time and I'm not really that candidate, then maybe I could just volunteer to help out and get to know your organization. You can get to know me. I mean, so I like what I'm hearing about what you're talking about doing. And I think I wouldn't close the door completely on the possibility of the job, though, just in case they were willing to work with you, right?
Well, and especially since I know I can do it.
Right.
So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate everything you had to say on risk. Somewhere up in this chat thing, I put one section of the table of contents for General Stanley McChrystal's book on risk.
I saw that.
Wonderful.
Thank
it's
you.
Wonderful. It truly is. On the other hand, he's a military man, and so he kind of has a little bit different. I'm more intuitive in the way I approach things, and you sort of are too. So that's why it's so cool to listen to you.
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate the feedback.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Darrel. And we have some good comments for you, Darrel. Great session. Best session so far. Thank you for this awesome session. So I see some good comments. Thank you. Thank you so much for tonight. And any last quick question, anybody? Going through?
Neha,
Feel free. Yes.
I read that, you know, like people who attend these sessions, they automatically get PDUs. So are we automatically going to get PDUs, or we have to manually submit them?
I don't think so. I think you'll have to manually submit those, but I can check that for you and I'll get back to you, Asma.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Because I have not yet submitted them in any session because of that reason, that if you are an active member, they automatically submit it for you.
All right. I'll get back to you on this. I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Any quick questions? All right. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good night.
so much. Thank you. Thank you, Darrel.
Sonia,
Yes, Darrel.
thank you so much for your wonderful support. I really appreciate
And you
it.
all have a nice
I'm going to
weekend.
connect you on LinkedIn. You were really very good. I learned a lot.
So
Thank
did
you.
I.
I am on LinkedIn, by the way. You're welcome to reach out to me there and I'll accept it. Just let me know that you were in my class.
I've already sent you a request.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you can connect.
Well, thank you.
That's why I wanted to give you a heads up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll go look for it.
Okay, have a nice weekend, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you
thanks.
all for joining us.
Thank you, Darrel. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye.
Bye.
Good night. And hope to see you all tomorrow again. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks.